Curtis is unable to be with us today, but he'll be back next week. I wanted to take this opportunity at the beginning of the show to remind you that if you like what you've been hearing on Hard Times and True Crimes, it would mean so much to us if you could leave us 5 stars on Apple Podcast. And we'd love if you could leave us a few words for a review. You can also rate us on Spotify and any other platform. If you want to support the show financially, you can buy us a coffee. Our Buy Me a Coffee link is on our website and on our show notes. We appreciate y'all so very much. If you are a child, a teenager, or are sensitive to violence, I'm going to ask that you not listen to this episode as it deals with a crime that's sexually motivated and extremely violent in nature. Again, parents, please do not let your kids listen to this one. Sexual sadism is defined as experiencing intense sexual arousal from the physical or psychological suffering of another person or animal. It also involves scaring other people to get them to do what you want them to do, and lying in order to put them in a situation to where you can harm or inflict pain on them. According to Psychology Today, among sexual offenders in the United States, fewer than 10% have sexual sadism disorder. But among individuals who have committed sexually motivated homicides, the rate of sexual sadism disorder ranged from 37 to 75%. Out of a study of 512 men and women, it showed that men's frequent exposure to pornography was correlated with sadistic behavior by men towards women. I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
So I want to shout out Cynthia, who bought us a coffee this week.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you. Yep. She donated to our Buy Me a Coffee campaign that helps keep the podcast running. So we really appreciate our listeners.
Yes.
And we thank you for sharing our podcast with your friends. And we thank you for the good feedback you send our way. And we thank you for the coffees.
Yes. Okay, so I have a story that is really sad. If you have kids, I would not recommend them listen to this story.
Okay. Or if you're sensitive to maybe too much graphic detail?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say come back next week.
Okay.
So we're going to go to Conway, South Carolina, which is in Horry County, and it happens to be one of the oldest towns in the state. Even though it's just a hop, skip, and a jump from Myrtle Beach, it's just a totally different vibe.
Yeah.
So from everything I've read, it just has that small town feel. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be an extension of Myrtle Beach. You know, they march to the beat of their own drum. Crystal Faye Todd, she would be about your age. She was born on January 4th of 1974 to 41-year-old Junior and 39-year-old Bonnie Todd. So Junior and Bonnie, they were a little older than what was typical in the 70s for having their first child, for sure.
Right.
So they really treasured Crystal. Miss Bonnie said that she was her little miracle. After all those years, she just couldn't believe she had her. Mm. Sadly, Junior would pass away when Crystal was just 11. And so it was her and her mama. But despite that tragedy, she was a happy child. She was, her mama's whole world. Mm-hmm. And I think with the death of her father, that probably even brought the two of them closer together.
I'm sure it did.
So Crystal grew up singing in her church choir, active in her youth group and school programs, and Miss Bonnie was right there for all of it. So Crystal and Bonnie, they also really enjoyed each other. They had fun together. But now that didn't mean that she didn't stand on business as a mom. She was one of those Southern women whose presence just kind of demanded respect, and everybody in Conway held her in high regard. They all called her Miss Bonnie. And Crystal also held her mama in high regard. She just didn't play.
Yeah.
As she grew into a teen, Crystal was popular. She was happy, lots of friends. She was a cheerleader. Even Crystal's teachers thought a lot of her. She had an almost constant, big, beautiful smile. She had brown hair that she kept about medium length in that typical 90s fashion, little bangs, you know.
I can picture that.
And she had some of the brightest blue eyes you'd ever see, according to her mama. Beautiful inside and out. She was only 5'3", but her big personality made up for what she lacked in height. Crystal was also a really big help to her mom. She kept their trailer clean, helped out around the house while Miss Bonnie worked. And you and I both, we grew up in single mother households. Mm-hmm. We know what it's like to help out around the house.
Oh, yeah.
Crystal, she actually enjoyed organizing and cleaning, unlike me. That's probably more like
Just
you.
like me.
Not only did she clean, her mom said she cooked her supper every night for her when she got off work.
Oh, that's sweet.
It is. Her mom said when Crystal was just 4 years old, she had her cooking eggs, grits, sausage, and making a pot of coffee. And she said she could do it every bit as good as her.
Oh, wow. That's impressive.
That is impressive. She also babysat and worked as a lifeguard at the local pool during the summer. In 1991, Crystal was 17, and in her senior year at Conway High School, she was a really good student with excellent grades. Miss Bonnie was really proud of that too. She had dreams of going to college. Miss Bonnie surprised her with a brand new metallic blue 1991 Toyota Celica as an early graduation present.
Nice.
And you know, that was probably a sacrifice.
Oh, yeah.
For her mother. And let me tell you, Crystal loved that car.
I'm sure she did.
She even had a personalized tag, like a real legal tag that said C. Todd.
Oh, that's cool.
Before that, she would have to ride to school with her friend, who was kind of like a cousin. His name was Ken Register. They had been best friends their whole lives. Like all teenagers, Crystal loved riding around, hanging out with her friends. And her best friends were a girl named Carla, who she'd grown up with and very close with, her cousin, Kevin James, and Ken Register, who was a friend and neighbor that, like I said, she'd grown up with. They had actually tried to date once when they were 14 and 15, but they realized pretty quick that they were better as friends.
Yeah. It's like, no, he's more like a family member. You just can't really get into
right.
I don't think the guy minds it as much. Right. But that's not typically something the girl, yeah.
But now Crystal's mom, she loved Ken. He was this all-American boy. He played football. He was an active member of their church. He helped his dad over the summer build an altar to put in the church. But it was probably one of those things where he wasn't perfect and Crystal knew.
I'm sure
but the mom didn't. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Because they're teenagers.
Exactly.
And Crystal, as good as she was still a teenager too. And she wasn't perfect. I made some of the dumbest mistakes of my life when I was 17. Literally.
Exactly. Like we all did.
Crystal had gotten in some trouble when she ran into a telephone pole with her car. She wasn't drunk, but she had been drinking.
Oh.
And like I said, her mom did not play games. Of course, she grounded her from her car for an amount of time to where she knew that wasn't acceptable.
Yeah.
But that's what a good mom does. And Crystal did seem to understand that. I mean, she was upset over it. Like, I can't believe I did this, but not like upset at her mom. Does that make sense?
Right.
So, of course, you know, they had some time to spend together. And I'm sure she got several talks about the dangers of drunk driving. It wasn't the same as it is now. Like in the 90s, I mean, like you would get in trouble, but not like you would today.
Oh, there are definitely more consequences because so many people have been killed.
Right.
It was probably in the late 80s, early 90s when the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, that MAD formed.
Do you remember those Halloween things where they'd take you to the wrecked cars?
Yes.
That was in the 90s.
Yes, I do remember that.
And they would show you these wrecked car and it was like heaven and hell.
Yes, there are some churches that still do those.
Really? Mm-hmm. They were terrifying.
Yeah. It was terrifying.
So one of those weekends when she was grounded, her mom took her to Brindle's to pick out what she wanted for Christmas.
I remember Brindle's.
This brings back memories. Crystal picked out a bracelet and a pink ice ring.
Oh, I still have my pink ice ring.
You do?
I do.
I wanted one so bad. I never had one, but I wanted one. I had forgotten about pink ice rings, and I was like, oh my gosh.
And then there were those panda coin rings.
Yes.
Do you remember those?
Yes, I never had one of those either, but I wanted one.
I didn't have one of those.
Oh, they were so cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, shortly after that, though, Crystal got off punishment. I think Miss Bonnie must have put the fear of God in her because her friend said after that she didn't drink. So on the evening of November 16th, Crystal had gone to a birthday dinner for her grandma, and she spent, a few hours with her family. And then at 7, she kissed her mom bye and went to the mall where she met a bunch of her friends, and they hung out in the parking lot like teenagers often did in those days. That was the cool place to be.
Oh, yeah.
They stayed there for a while doing what teenagers do, talking, laughing, fighting, listening to music. Until around 9 p.m. when Crystal's friend Carla got off work because she worked at the mall. And then the two of them got into Crystal's car and they drove to a party out in the Punch Bowl community, which was still in Conway. They stayed there for about an hour and a half. Crystal's cousin was actually there. Carla had a curfew of 11:30, and so they left the party at 11 so that Crystal could get her back to the mall to get her friends. All these kids took curfew seriously. So got her back to the car so that she could make it home by 11:30. Now, Crystal didn't have to be home until midnight. And after being grounded all that time, she wanted to spend the rest of her time out with friends. So she had seen her cousin at the party, and he said he'd meet her there at the mall and that they could go get something to eat and hang out for an hour or so before she had to be home at 12. But he hadn't showed up. And so at 11:15, Crystal told Carla goodbye, and she told her she was just going to go get something to eat. At just after midnight, Miss Bonnie started to worry because Crystal hadn't came home yet. Crystal was very punctual about her curfew, but she waited an hour, and then she actually called 911 at a little after 1 a.m. She just asked them to please help her find her daughter. Crystal never missed curfew without calling her. And the dispatcher, he just happened to recognize Miss Bonnie's voice. He knew her. And he said, she's a teenager. She's lost track of time. She may not be close to a phone. He was like, it's going to be okay. He's like, I'll come out there tomorrow and tell her she better not ever do this again to you. That kind of thing. He told her to try to get some sleep. But how is she going to sleep with Crystal not at home in bed?
Oh, no.
Have you had those nights?
Yes. Yeah, you're not going to get any sleep.
No, they're miserable. She called Ken and she called Carla. Carla told her what all she and Crystal had done that night, that they had met at the mall, they had gone to the party, that she had seen Crystal leave at 11:15. And Ken said that he actually hadn't seen Crystal Saturday at all because he was gone with his girlfriend. But he was really worried, and so he had offered to call some of the hospitals. By 8 a.m., Miss Bonnie's stomach was in knots, and her daughter still was not home. She's crying. By this time, she's frantic. She knows something's wrong.
Yeah, sure.
She calls 911, and she told police that she knew that Crystal was somewhere she did not want to be, or she would have called her. Mm-hmm. Not that they didn't take it serious before, but it had been an hour, and how many teens missed their curfew. And so the police came over, and Miss Bonnie filed like an official missing persons report. Meanwhile, they're questioning everybody that Crystal had been with the night before, calling them like, hey, have you seen Crystal? What do you know? Carla and Ken, they were beside themselves with worry. They came over to see Miss Bonnie, to check on her and to see what they could do. And Ken was so upset that he actually threw up in her yard. His mom said he had not been feeling well the night before. And with all of this with Crystal, it must have just thrown him over the edge. So they got a call, though, from a friend of Crystal's who said that at 11:30, they had seen Crystal's car parked on the Elm Street side of Conway Middle School, but she wasn't in the car. And there were no other vehicles there, so they couldn't say who she was with. The police, along with Bonnie Todd and her boyfriend, headed up to the school. And sure enough, Crystal's car was parked there. It was locked with her purse inside. Didn't look as though a struggle had taken place. But it was a little odd because she'd left her purse and her jacket in there, and it was a chilly November night.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I don't think teenage girls, or at least back then, we didn't leave our purses.
Right.
I didn't just get out of my car and leave it with my purse in it.
Miss Bonnie thought she knew whoever she got in the car with.
Right.
And so it was like, oh, I'll be right back.
That's what I mean. Like, she wouldn't have just taken off and gone somewhere without her pocketbook. Yeah.
Well, she did say that she knew that Crystal would not have gotten in a car with a stranger. And if she had been forced to, she would have put up one heck of a fight.
Yeah.
She actually used to tell Crystal, if you're kidnapped, I don't care if you're going down the road 55 miles an hour, you jump out of that car because it's better to be broke to pieces than dead.
That's right.
Crystal had just been well prepared her whole life for what to do if somebody ever tried to take her. And Miss Bonnie just knew in her gut that she had not been kidnapped.
And we as parents, we know what our kids are likely to do and what's in character for them or not. That's
exactly right. So the question was, what had happened to Crystal between 11:15 when she dropped Carla off and 11:30 when her car was spotted at the junior high?
Yeah, I mean, like, that's a 15-minute window.
Yes. Who had she gone with, or who had taken her? Okay, so this is the part where you're going to want to probably skip forward about 3 or 4 minutes. As police were trying to figure out where Crystal was, that Sunday morning, a hunter walked up on a trail of blood that he followed across a dirt road that led to the badly mutilated body of a female in a ditch in Horry County. It was a sight that the hunters nor the investigators will ever be able to get out of their mind. There was so much blood on the victim's face that they couldn't identify her. When police made it to the scene, they found that she had been stabbed more than 30 times in her abdomen, her back, her face, and her head. Her throat had been slit from ear to ear so violently that she had almost been decapitated.
Wow.
And she had been disemboweled. Not only that, but her pants were pulled down and her shirt was lifted up, exposing her breast. They strongly suspected that she'd been raped because it definitely appeared to be sexually motivated.
That poor girl.
It was truly, it was worse than horrific.
Yeah.
And they were saying that seasoned investigators were throwing up. Investigators, like I said, they weren't able to identify her. They didn't know for sure who she was. I don't know if they suspected at that time that it was her because they may not have even known yet.
Maybe had not even gotten word that she was missing. Yeah.
But they did notice that this female had a high school class ring on her finger. It had a purple gemstone and it had the name Crystal Faye Todd engraved on the inside. Horry County Police Chief J. Gordon Harris, who was leading the investigation, had to break the news to Miss Bonnie.
Oh.
Her reaction was just, it's always heartbreaking whenever a child is killed, but this woman broke my heart.
Well, she had to have been beyond devastated.
They were saying just like guttural cries and screaming and why, just so many tears. And just kept asking, how am I going to live? I don't want to.
Oh, that poor, poor woman.
I know. She said she wished that had been her instead. Investigators, there's little comfort you can bring to a mother who's lost a child, but they promised her they were going to do everything that they could to catch Crystal's murderer. And I think the fact that it was Miss Bonnie and Crystal, these beloved members of their community, and the brutality of, the murder, the investigation was very personal to them.
And that's those smaller community, hometown relationships and, those communities draw together.
They do. And I will say that for the rest of Miss Bonnie's life, she and this investigator were friends.
Oh,
yeah. So an autopsy would reveal that not only was she stabbed 32 times, not only was her throat just brutally cut, not only was she disemboweled, but she had been raped vaginally, anally, and orally. She had defensive wounds on her left hand, which at first they couldn't understand because Crystal, she wasn't left-handed. So that just seemed odd to them. But the autopsy showed that the reason that was because she had been stabbed in the head on her left side, which affected her right hand.
Oh, yeah.
And she couldn't move her right hand.
Good grief. That is really hard to imagine how, just hearing you say that is, wow.
And so what that means is that she was alert and she was aware of what was happening to her. She was disemboweled while being raped.
What in the world?
Yes. Her throat was cut while being raped.
Good grief. This just sounds so sadistic.
Oh, it was so sadistic that the community wondered if this was not devil worship because it was just so brutal. And then some of the stab wounds didn't have any blood coming from them, which meant that this attacker continued to stab her long after she was dead. They knew that she had been stabbed with a 3.5-inch blade because of measuring how far the wounds were. And the blade had to be strong enough to penetrate her skull because it literally penetrated and crushed her skull. So this person was strong enough to stab her in the head and break her skull.
That just sounds like a crime of passion.
Yes.
Because that's a lot of, like you said, it had to be strong enough. That's a lot of rage.
When trying to figure it out, they did not believe this was a stranger. And it seemed a little bit more than just, sexually motivated crimes are always terrible, but a lot of the times they're killing them so they don't get caught. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And this went way beyond that.
So there has to be a deeper motive.
Yes. Police interviewed everybody that Crystal had been in contact with, of course, the night before, and especially those that were closest to her. Have you ever heard of SLED? No. So this is the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, and it's an agency in South Carolina that they provide manpower and assistance to other law enforcement agencies throughout the state.
Okay, wow.
So instead of calling in the FBI, they have SLED.
Okay.
And they say they are awesome.
That's interesting that they have that. Do you think it is because they're down there like near Myrtle Beach? There's a lot of crime at Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, probably.
There are some real seedy areas and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you know firsthand about these seedy areas?
Well, most of the people that grew up here, every year at graduation, that's what we do. We go down to Myrtle Beach. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on down there. But one time my sister and I went down there. Somehow, I was 15. My sister was like 18. And we ended up riding down there with these two guys that my sister had just met that night. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, these were stupid things like that we should never have done. This could have been really, really dangerous. But we got in the car with them and rode down there. And then after being there for a couple of nights, we all ran out of money. And those guys' car had broke down and we couldn't get back home.
Oh my gosh.
So we called our older sister and we were trying to get her to get us out of this jam.
Yeah.
And so our mama wouldn't find out. I don't remember the details of all of that real well. Anyway, either my sister Angel called Mama and told on us, or we had to call her ourselves. And we did lie about who we were down there with. And our mama had to come get us at she worked second shift, she had to come get us at when she got off work that night. So we were down there waiting until about 4 a.m. for her to pick us up. And
in the seedy area?
Well, we were on the Grand Strand. And there was this guy on drugs sleeping on the beach.
Oh my goodness!
They're usually.
I'm glad you're alive to do this podcast with me.
Yeah, me too. Usually, nothing good happens down there after
dark.
Right. Yeah, that was a crazy story. There's a lot more details I can tell you off the mic, but
don't go to the beach.
Do not
with guys you don't know,
and especially Myrtle Beach.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Yeah. So yeah, that is probably why they have SLED, because imagine how many girls probably get murdered down there. I mean, I hear about it all the time.
Yes.
Even still.
Yes.
SLED, they actually got involved in the investigation really early on. And David Caldwell, he was one of their profilers. And so it was his job to create a profile of Crystal's murderer. His speciality was going into crime scenes where there were no suspects and basically creating the profile of the suspect. And they said that it was eerie how accurate his profiles were.
I love watching guys do that.
It's crazy to me.
It is it's an
And
art.
specific.
So specific.
The profile suggested that Crystal's murderer would be someone with a criminal record, like an undercover criminal record. That he most likely knew Crystal, most likely lived close to her, would have been in his 20s, angry, physically strong, and this person would not be a suspect in the crime. He would also be confident that he would never be considered a suspect. How specific is that?
Yeah.
But after getting this profile, the police had this to go on and really didn't have much else. So they actually asked Crystal's male friends and some of her family to give blood samples. And 52 men willingly came forward and complied.
Wow.
That's incredible.
That is incredible.
I mean, because they didn't have to do that.
It sounds like they all just really wanted this person found.
Yeah. It was 1991, but the DNA testing was in its infancy, and they were going to be able to use DNA in this case. While they're, waiting for these results to come back, they went through Crystal's belongings and, just trying to get some ideas of what was going on. Because, we don't always tell our parents everything.
No. And did she have a boyfriend?
Well,
Okay.
They find out when they come upon one of her notebooks. You know how we scrawl?
Oh, yes.
Crystal loves. They found a name in one of her notebooks, and it was Andy Tyndall. And this is a guy that Crystal was clearly infatuated with. She had only known him for about a week or two, and he did live out of town. She was introduced by a friend. Again, it was a different time. I'm not excusing this, but he was quite a bit older than her. He was 31.
Oh.
And she was 17.
Okay, yeah.
And
she's
so
underage.
She's underage. All of her friends knew it. But he also had a record. He was also married.
Oh.
Yes. And he's hanging out with a 17-year-old girl.
Yeah, that's so many red flags.
In fact, he was wanted in Alabama.
Oh, no.
Mm-hmm. Now, he was wanted was something kind of minor. He was on probation, and so he had somehow violated it, but I don't think it was like a huge deal.
Okay.
His record involved like theft and stuff like that.
So not a violent crime.
Mm-mm. But when police went to talk to him, he ran away. Like ran, led them on a chase.
Yeah, that doesn't look good for him.
No. So they catch him, they question him, and they're like, this guy, he's strong. He has a record. He definitely played the part of a nice guy, but they felt like he was predatory, in nature just because of, their age differences and things. They really believed they had a perfect suspect, right?
And he does sound like a perfect suspect.
He does.
I mean, that's just chock full of red flag.
They take him into the interrogation room and interrogate him. They show him pictures of Crystal's body, tell him they know that he murdered her. They went in on him. They just knew that he was it. He gave them his blood. He did so willingly, I might add. So like I said, DNA was in its infancy, but it's, gaining traction at this time. So they did this analysis. He was not a match. Andy Tyndall was not a match.
Wow. So they're back to square one.
He was not Crystal's murderer. And in fact, there was no way.
So why did he run?
He ran because he didn't want to go to jail in Alabama.
Oh, okay.
But he would later say, I would not wish what they did to me on no. I mean, imagine seeing this girl's body. I mean, even if you are, okay, he's some other things. We all had those weird older guys that hung out with us. I mean, we just did.
Yeah, I married mine.
Yeah, they weren't.
Kidding.
They weren't all bad guys. I don't know. I mean, I don't want my daughter around a 30-year-old.
I was not underage. I was 18. So
right. No, I mean, I get it. It doesn't make you a murderer.
No, it doesn't. It does make you shady as all get out, but it doesn't make you a murderer.
And especially if you're married, it just doubles the shade.
Yes. Yeah.
They did this analysis on the murderer, because, they had the murderer's DNA. The profile of the perpetrator was very unusual. So rare that only 1 in 250 million Caucasians and only 1 in 1.5 billion African Americans could have had this profile.
Wow.
Forensic evidence exonerated Andy Tyndall.
Okay.
Crystal Faye Todd's funeral was at High Point Baptist Church. There was over 1,000 mourners that came to pay their respects. They were able to have an open casket funeral.
Oh, wow. That's surprising to me.
Yeah. Now, she looked beautiful. I saw a picture of her. Now, they did have, I don't know if it was a turtleneck or a scarf up around her neck because of the severity of, those wounds. You can just see in the front row, Miss Bonnie, her head buried in her hands. Now, the funeral was beautiful. She had asked some of Crystal's best friends to be the pallbearer. So, of course, she had her nephew and Ken register. Her friends were brokenhearted, especially, I think, Ken. He cried a lot. He was visibly shaken. At the end of the funeral, I saw a video of him laying a single white rose on her coffin. Just incredibly sad. The tragedy, the senselessness of this just made it so much worse. Miss Bonnie had to take back that pink ice ring and bracelet and instead purchased a little Christmas tree for her daughter's grave.
Oh, how tragic.
Oh my gosh.
We both have daughters. We cannot even wrap our minds around how devastating that must have been for that mom.
I can't. Thankfully, she had her nephew. She had Carla. She had Ken register, stopping by to check on her, comfort her several times a week. I think especially Ken, because Bonnie adored him. He was a neighbor, so she's used to seeing him. He was very curious about, how the investigation was coming along and the suspects. He was just really invested because he felt so bad for Bonnie. She wasn't living. She was just existing without Crystal. An eyewitness came forward saying that he had seen Crystal's car that night parked down at the middle school and that there had been a man and a woman beside the car. So they had this guy do a police sketch, and that man and that woman were Crystal's mom and her boyfriend. Yes.
Her mom and her boyfriend were standing outside of her car?
And so they're like, oh my gosh, is Bonnie covering up something for her boyfriend?
But she just can't be.
Like, what in the heck is going on? Well, then the eyewitness came back up there and he said, I was actually really drunk that night and I was driving and maybe it was the next day that I saw them. I guess he went on a bender and he would have seen them the next day because they were out there.
Yeah.
After they got that call.
He could have just got his timeline.
That's what he said too.
Sometimes you miss time or whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was just bizarre.
I just don't feel like this mama could have had anything to do with this. She just sounds like too good of a mama.
No, they knew. I mean, they had to look into it.
Sure.
But she was mad, and I don't blame her because she's like, for anybody to think that I would hurt my own daughter like that, it's just ridiculous.
And most of those people knew her too. I'm sure they knew that was ridiculous.
So anyway, they're going through everybody who had given the samples and they realized that they needed Ken Register's sample. When they went to his house, because, they had talked to him and been like, hey, we're going to come get a sample. And he was like, why do you need a sample? And they're like, well, so that we can test the DNA. And he's like, what's that?
Oh, yeah, because he didn't know what that was either.
Right. And so they explain it. And he's like, well, I'm going to have to talk to my mom. And they're like, everybody else is doing it. Like, why would you not? Like, you're supposed to be her best friend. All of her other friends and families willingly came to us.
Volunteered.
Right. And he was like, okay, I'll do it. And so he did. But he did go to Miss Bonnie and he's like, this DNA stuff is just, I don't know. It's just weird. And he said, I'm worried that they're going to accuse me. He was like, I mean, they're just trying so hard to find the murderer. And he's like, this DNA stuff, it just, it was new for one thing. And he's like, I just don't trust it. And she's like, Ken, you have nothing to worry about. You're not the killer. He was just really, I guess, suspicious of all of this DNA stuff. He hadn't even really been a suspect because, for one thing, he hadn't been with her that night. Like, he wasn't with her. He actually had an alibi.
Okay, what was his alibi?
Okay, so he had been with his girlfriend, 14-year-old. So he's 19. I know, I'm like, what the crap?
Yeah.
14-year-old Angela Rabin at the Dodge City go-karting place. And her parents had been there as well. They worked there. The other was his mother, Shirley Register, who she said, hey, he couldn't have done it because he got home, like 12:30 or so. And so I guess she's saying there's not enough time for him to have committed this murder. And she'd seen him and she knew if he had committed a murder and came in, he would have probably had blood all over his clothes. There's no way.
As violent as that was, he would have had to have had some blood.
But guess whose DNA was a perfect match?
Ken Register's.
When Detective Knowles called Bonnie Todd and asked her who is the one person that you would not suspect to be Crystal's murderer, she said, Ken Register. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, he is her murderer.
You just gave me cold chills.
Can you imagine the anger? He was a pallbearer at her funeral.
Oh.
He had come over there checking on her, pretending to care about her. Yeah. I just can't imagine the anger I would have towards somebody. And everything that I'm feeling, she had it times 10.
Had to have. Just imagine thinking but she watched this kid grow up.
Yeah.
I mean, she probably really, I bet she probably didn't even believe them at first, did she?
No, she did. She said it just clicked.
She just knew.
She knew.
Oh.
She said, it was like, what? I mean, I remember instances like that in my own life with other things, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Like when all of a sudden, it's like you can't unsee it.
I should have known.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was her reaction.
Wow.
And it was a shock, but oh my gosh, she just said he just became the devil to her.
Yeah.
Then they start digging into his background and they realize he actually fits the profile more than they realized that he did. 2 months before this incident, he had gone to the local college, drove up to these two college girls, asked them for directions or just some dumb question. And he starts masturbating
in front of them. Creep.
And lifts himself up so that they can see that he's.
Oh my gosh, creep.
And they're like, oh my God, and then he just starts speeding off. Well, one of these girls has the wherewithal to be like, hey, when she did that, he stopped. Well, then his lights came on and she got his license plate number.
Oh, that was so smart.
So smart. She called the cops.
Good for her.
The case hadn't even come to court yet.
Because I hadn't had time.
Right.
So he's not even on their radar at that point.
No. But then they also got wind that 3 years earlier, when he was 15 years old, this woman had come into this local garage to get her vehicle worked on. And he would go in there and work with his uncle, help out after school and during the summers on the weekends. And there was a woman that had came in with her daughter and he had stolen her telephone number, gotten her telephone number and made these obscene phone calls to her, telling her that he was going to rape her, slit her throat, disembowel her, that he was going to murder her. Basically, he described what he did to Crystal.
Oh my gracious. Okay, this is a question that you may not have the answer to, but do they think, did Crystal have any inkling what a creep he was, or is he able to hide this from everybody he knows?
She did tell her mother, maybe a month or two before this, Crystal hated cigarette smoke. Mm-hmm. Her mom smoked. And so she was always on her mom, do not be smoking in my car.
Oh, yeah.
I wish she wouldn't smoke in the house. She just hated cigarette smoke. And she told her mom, she was like, he wants to date me again. She was like, but all he wants to do is smoke cigarettes and have sex. And her mom was like, well, then don't. That's why I said earlier that Crystal knew stuff that she probably didn't want to tell her mom, but she did end up telling that. But, you know, Bonnie was probably like,
Well, she probably is chalking it up to typical teenage boy behavior, which, I mean, it is.
the hormones are strong.
Yeah. That does not point to
No,
any
no, it doesn't make
creepy
you.
stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, she did tell Crystal, well, you might want to not date him then, but
Yeah.
Crystal didn't want to date him.
Yeah.
You know how it is when you're friends with somebody, like even if you know stuff about him, he was a very close friend and you don't necessarily want to be BFFs with him. You're not going to like rat him out.
Right.
So I don't know if he had tried stuff with her in the past, because I get the feeling that he like really wanted her, and that if not to be his girlfriend, wanted her in that way.
And I think too, as teenage girls, you know, just like that story I told, we make bad decisions sometimes, but maybe he has done some creepy stuff, but she's certainly not entertaining any ideas that he could do something like that to her. Like in her teenage mind, she's not thinking he's that dangerous.
Right. She's probably thinking like, he just wants to have sex or something.
He's just, you know, weird or whatever she knew about him. We don't know. She can't tell us, but
he might have asked her to have sex before or something like that. Or
even tried to pressure her into it.
Yeah.
But you're not thinking, you know, he's a violent murderer.
So they arrested him at his job and they took him down to, you know, be interrogated. And he just kept saying, I want to talk to my mom. I want to talk to my mama. And
why are these guys always such mamas?
Oh, I know. I told you, I think mothers create weirdos. I do. Don't baby your boys or your girls. Anyways, he was like, I want to talk to my mama. And they're like, no, you know, you can't talk to your mama. We want to. So they interrogate him, talk to him. He won't really tell him anything. I want to talk to my mama. I want to talk to my mama. So they're like, okay, we're going to go, you know, to your mom's house. Well, first of all, they're telling him that they have evidence that they actually don't have. But they're allowed to do that. You can lie in an investigation. They do actually go to her house. She doesn't come back with them, which I just find really weird, because even if I knew my kid had committed a murder, I'm going down there and find out what the crap is going on.
Yeah.
Right?
I want to know some details.
She didn't come back to the station. She sent a note. And the note said, like, basically, like, everything's going to be okay. I know what time you came in. I'm going to stand behind you. Love you, mama.
That sounds to me like she knows what kind of person he is. She knows he's guilty, whatever they've told her, and she's letting him know she's gonna lie for him.
Right. Well, they didn't give it to him.
Good.
They said, your mom said she loves you very much, and to just tell the truth.
Good for them. Good detectives there.
Very good. And that is when he confessed.
Wow.
Well, partially. I believe he lied through most of it, but he did admit that he was Crystal's murderer. But what he said was that he had seen Crystal at a stoplight and had asked her if she wanted to ride with him to go get something to eat. But instead, they decided to go to a spot to have consensual sex. I do not believe that.
Liar.
He said that after they had sex, that Crystal was infuriated with him because he had ejaculated inside of her. And she started screaming and cussing at him and told him that if she came up pregnant, that she was going to tell everybody that he raped her. And he just lost it. And he just literally blacked out and went crazy and he stabbed her. He didn't mention anything about raping her. His semen was found in her mouth, in her anus, in her vagina, and it was brutal. Yeah. It was brutal. And some of it was done after she was dead. Yeah.
So there was no blacking out and just, Matter of fact,
disemboweling her.
I think it almost sounds like he's making it sound like a crime of passion. I almost think it sounds like he's probably been thinking about this for a long time.
Oh, absolutely. From that phone call.
Yes. Saw an opportunity and took it.
Yeah. And if it hadn't been her, it may have been somebody else.
But he's really had her in his mind the whole time.
Yeah. Well, I think what happened was he took her there to have sex and she wouldn't do it.
Right. That's what I think too. And that's when he got mad.
Yes.
But I think he probably had...
That's his fantasy anyway. Yeah, absolutely. And he told the investigators, like, she did drugs. She slept around. I mean, can you believe this guy? Like, he's murdered her and he's literally trying to deflect the blame. It's her fault.
Yeah.
She was so bad. She said it, you know, she started screaming at me and yelling at me.
Painting her as the bad person and him as a victim.
And so in court, guess what he pled?
Did he plead not guilty?
Yes.
Ugh.
And his mother testified for him and said he could not have done it. Miss Bonnie said Crystal's blood is on her hands too, because if he did in fact come in at the time she says he came in, then he was covered in her blood.
He had to have been.
And Miss Bonnie Todd believes that she helped cover that up.
She had to have.
Mm-hmm.
Either she was, at the very least, she was just giving him an alibi time-wise, and he didn't come in at that time, but she knows he did something.
Right.
But goodness gracious, at the very most, he really could have come in covered in blood, and she complicit was that, is that the word, was complicit in
yeah, because he probably told her that same story. Like, I just blacked out because she was yelling at me. She was hitting me. She was telling me. You know what I mean?
Either way, how horrible.
Oh, how horrible. And he had 6 weeks to clean out his car. He was up for the death penalty.
If you tell me he does not get the death penalty, I'm going to be so upset.
Well, he's up for the death penalty. And that is, Bonnie Todd wanted him to get the electric chair. That's what he deserves for sure. It's not even enough to say her life will never be the same. Mm-mm. He ruined her entire life.
Yeah.
People came forward talking about how, you know, I told you he worked at that garage, and some of his coworkers came forward and said he had a really bad pornography addiction, that he would buy these magazines like almost every day and sit in his car and look at these magazines. The woman came forward who he had made those phone calls to her and her daughter. And she did go to the parents, and she actually went to the police, but because he was 15, they really didn't do anything. And his mother, Shirley, was like, he couldn't have done that. And she was like, you need to get him help.
Yeah.
They didn't. They wanted to tape his interview, his confession, but he wouldn't let them. So he says that everything that he said, it was coerced, that he would have never given his DNA if he had known what it was. He was lied to, just all these things. Yeah. Thank God the jury saw through it. I mean, there was just enough there. They knew.
And the DNA doesn't lie.
The DNA doesn't
matter if you wouldn't have given your DNA. You did give your DNA, and it proves that you're a horrible murderer.
Exactly. He tried to question the integrity of the DNA because it was so new then, and it was new.
And I'm sure he thought he was smart enough to...
Oh, yeah. Of course, of course. He was found guilty, but the jury did not sentence him to death because he was only 18 years old. And so they gave him life in prison, which actually means 35 years.
That's nothing for what he did. I cannot believe they didn't give him the death penalty.
And he was a budding serial killer.
Yeah.
For sure.
If there ever was one. On the first one, how many would he have done?
There would have been another, for sure. He came up for parole actually in 2022, the first time, but he didn't
apply for it.
He didn't apply for parole, but he did just come up for it in 2024, and he did for that one. But thank God, like her friends, family, the community came forward, and he was denied parole.
Oh, goodness, good.
Ken Register's mother still swears on his innocence. She still has his car parked in her backyard.
Oh.
The car that was probably covered in blood, Crystal's blood, that he used to... She's a sicko, I think. People were saying, I mean, I don't know. I hate to say stuff like this and get on those bandwagons, but they were saying it was like they had a very weird relationship. Some of those things are twisted. Even if they're not sexual, they're weird. So, you know, Ken and his mother, they have basically, like I said, questioned the integrity of the DNA. But that DNA has been retested multiple times, and it has always confirmed every time those original results.
And now we know that DNA is
It's
accurate.
It is, yeah. The DNA don't lie.
No.
He savagely murdered Crystal Todd.
Yeah.
And without DNA evidence, there's no doubt he would have probably gotten away with it. And that original suspect would have probably been convicted. And he probably would have got the death penalty because he was not 18. He was 30.
Yeah, and married, and all of that would have really looked bad on him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bonnie Todd would later say that she loved her daughter more than she loved her own life. And she wished it had been her. She said she has no business being dead. Bonnie remained friends with the prosecutor, like I said, for the rest of her life. She passed away in September of 2014 at the age of 79, and she's resting beside her daughter. And I just hope she's at peace.
Oh, I do too.
My question for you is, do you think it was premeditated or no?
I do think it was premeditated. I don't know if he premeditated it, like planned it out.
That for that night?
Right.
Yeah.
But like you kind of talked about earlier, I think it's something he had been thinking about for a while, and he found himself with this opportunity, and he tried for it, and then she probably did rebuff him. Yeah. And it set him off, and he just fulfilled something he had probably already been meditating on.
Right.
And it probably was going to happen.
Yeah.
He probably in his mind knew he was going to do that at some point.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And I don't think just to anybody. I think he had planned to probably do that to her.
And I do think it was a crime of passion, but I also think it was a sick fantasy of his. But I do believe that he tried to have sex with her. And he may have even known she would turn him away. He may have asked her for sex before, took her to that remote location for that specific purpose, knowing that she was going to say no, like kind of already mad. But I do believe, obviously, from those phone calls, that was in him. That was a fantasy of his. He had that knife with him. Yeah. Which maybe, I mean, guys carry knives. My husband carry, so I don't know if, that could have been something that he just carries anyway. But for it to have been that vicious of a murder and to do the sexual things that he did to her.
Yeah.
Is just beyond sick.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question. Do you think that his mom just provided an alibi and didn't?
No, I think she knew.
And do you think she helped clean up the...
Yes.
You do?
I think she knew. I don't think there's any way that she would not have known. He had been sick the night before. He would have been covered in blood. Where is he going to go take a shower?
Right. Right.
You know what I mean?
He had to have gone in and
he had to have come home. She knew that he had been sick the night before because that's what she had told Bonnie Todd when he threw up in her yard the next day.
Yeah. And yet she maintained his innocence and still does.
And still, yeah. If she's still alive, and I believe she is, his dad has since died, but she's still alive.
Oh, I did think of a question earlier and I forgot to ask it. Do you know how long it was between the time that Crystal was murdered until they found out it was him?
She was murdered in November, and I believe it was February when he was arrested. Okay. It was February because I know that, they'd gone through Christmas in January. So yeah, it was February when he was finally arrested, and it takes a while to get those DNA tests back. Yeah. I'm so thankful for that evidence though.
I know it has really made a difference in crimes today.
And I believe it was the first one. It was the first used in South Carolina. If not, definitely one of the first. Yeah. And I'm so thankful for that profile.
Yeah.
How accurate.
Crazy.
So he was a neighbor that lived within 3 miles of her, who had a temper, who was strong, big and strong. I'll show you a picture of him. He was big and strong. He worked out. Who didn't think he would be caught. I mean, because he was so close to Bonnie, and he didn't know about this DNA stuff. He did have that criminal background. No, just nobody knew it. I mean, he literally fit the bill.
To
It was
a
somebody
T.
that they would not have suspected.
Mm-mm.
I mean, he fit every bit of that profile.
Wow. Those were some hard times.
Yes, they were. Thank y'all for bearing with me narrating this episode. Curtis does a much better job. I miss him. He'll be back next week. Until then, enjoy your family and drink lots of good coffee.